Kia ora, John Winters talking to you from New Zealand, and today we're going to be flicking around the globe, UK, United States and Australia, but we're going to start with that giant of an operation, Amazon, and they're spreading their wings. They're staying online, but they're going onto the road and onto the rail, following hard on the heels of the news that they will be going into bricks and mortar. And as I suggested last time, that bricks and mortar could well be Sainsbury's if they decided that the quick way to get into bricks and mortar was just to take over an existing operation and then change it to Amazon. But we'll wait and see. In the meanwhile, this online giant, they're setting up in railway stations, would you believe, in kiosks and railway stations, and they're offering a rotating range of goods at the railway station. So clearly it's not going to be very big because it's a kiosk, but let's see what they're starting with. Now, the first of these kiosks will be appearing at some London railway stations, so King's Cross, Paddington, Charing Cross, Liverpool Street and London Bridge. So what's the first offering that they're putting on the shelves? Well, I'm surprised actually, because it's Boody's Mulberry Gin at £14.99 a bottle, 40% discount on the RRP, recommended retail price. Reminds me of the decision to sell wine in New Zealand supermarkets was actually made. The decision was made in 1989 and it started to happen in 1991. Just wine. Those who opposed it said that, if you do this, then there'll be housewives, they'll be parking in the car park and they'll be going into the supermarkets and they'll be buying the wine and they'll be sitting in their cars drinking it out of the bottle. Well, of course, that was rubbish and that didn't happen. But it just paints me a picture of someone buying a bottle of gin and getting on the train to go home after a hard day's work in London town, and then deciding he might have a few swigs of his gin on the way home and getting home absolutely blotto. But it's just a picture that was painted in my mind. The kiosks are an extension of the Amazon treasure trucks. Now, these have been rolling around the UK since 2017. It's a large vehicle driving to different towns with a rotating selection of stock customers can buy at discounted prices. So you see, Amazon is changing. It's changing to meet the needs of where we are today. So it'll be interesting to see how this develops. But I think there will be some criticism of starting off with alcohol. But we'll have to wait and see. And obviously they've got to be licensed, all these kiosks. So that creates another not problem, but another part of the administration to do for these kiosks. But we'll wait and see. And in the meantime, we'll move on to the United States. Now, Mondelez, which owns Cadbury and others, it's decided that it's going to sell its Philadelphia cheese. They're mulling over the sale. They haven't made the final decision yet, but it's their soft cheese arm and very popular. It's known as Philly. And there also will be other dairy brands that they have in Europe to focus on their faster growing chocolate and biscuits ranges. Potential buyers are expected to include Kraft Heinz, of course, French dairy group Lactalis and Upfield, previously Unilever's spreads division until that was sold off, as well as private equity firms. Mondelez recently sold its processed cheese business in the Middle East and the North Africa region. We're seeing a lot of this happening at the moment with these global players who are deciding to focus on core business and to sell off some of the peripheries. And so we'll probably see more as time goes on. And we've seen Arnott's, and that Arnott's belongs to Campbell's Soups, famous for their Campbell's condensed soup. And Arnott's is a biscuit brand in Australia and New Zealand, and they're in the process of selling that off too. So there'll be more on that. I think it's still going through, but I'll be talking more about that another time. But we move on to Aldi. I doubt if there will ever be a podcast where Aldi doesn't come up somewhere along the line, but it's moving into premium, which is interesting. And why? Well, if you were to go and look at a typical Aldi car park, and I did that in Sydney, Australia, some years ago when I went over there, and it's amazing the cars that are in the car park. You would expect perhaps to see Fords and I'll do that again. It's right, I'll carry on. You'll expect to see Fords and other brands of that sort of level, but no. I saw in the car park BMWs, Mercedes, and it's attracting people in this category of the market who are looking for good bargains and are also going in for those specials. Now, what they're doing is they're putting more premium products on the shelf. They're expanding their award-winning champagne, adding several new premium variants. New additions include the first ever organic champagne from long-standing supplier Filzo et Fil, 75 centilitre bottle at $26.99. They are in the Marne Valley, which is southeast of Paris. So obviously Aldi is recognizing that it's got to cater for these customers who are coming in and are prepared to spend more and spend higher premium products. So we'll see how that develops, if that develops in other parts of the world, as well as they're doing it in the UK. I should have said that at the beginning. Now, there's a huge growth ahead in shopping by mobile optimized. That's a big mouthful, isn't it? Shopping by smartphone is really what it is, and is expected to be the fastest growing area within the UK retail market, with spending going up by more than £17 billion in the next 5 years to reach £33.2 billion by 2024, according to Global Data Company. It reckons smartphone business will account for 40% of business by then, with labels losing share. I'll just do that again. It reckons smartphone business will account for 40% of business by then, with tablets losing share as shoppers turn more and more to iPhones. I still can't do that. I find that far too difficult. I would prefer, and I do prefer, to shop online on my desktop or on a tablet, but I find it too fiddly on the mobile phone. Right, so we move on. More and more insects are crawling onto our shelves. Now, that's not that the supermarkets have got a problem in that particular area with keeping the place clean, because these are actually going on in packaged goods. Kaufland, which is the part of the German Schwarz Group, which also owns Lidl, the German discounter, they are turning to more insect food for you to savour. Interesting. Why? Because customers have taken to insects so well. Now that really surprises me, but insects are full of protein and obviously customers are enjoying eating their insects. They're now offering 2 pasta variants, macaroni rigata and basil fusilli, and there are 3 granola variants, apple and cinnamon, dark chocolate and raspberry and pumpkin. Sounds all very tasty. Just have to forget that there's some insects in there. They're obviously not crawling around. Sounds mouth-watering, don't they? But when I tell you they all contain insect flour from buffalo worms, are you quite so keen? Well, I don't think you really realise. I mean, flour's flour, so you bite it, you eat it and see, and I'm sure most people will take to it. What's so special about buffalo worms? They contain many proteins, such as unsaturated fatty acids, micronutrients, including copper, iron, and magnesium. So why not give them a go? You never know, you might get to like them. Now, we're turning to the relationship between suppliers and supermarkets. In 2 countries in the world, which is the UK and Australia, the government has decided that it's not happy with the way that the supermarkets are working with suppliers, and obviously there have been quite a lot of complaints from suppliers that the supermarkets are using bullying tactics to get what they want and to screw the suppliers down on prices. Now, before you say, oh, well, that's all right, because if they screw the suppliers down on prices, then things are going to be cheaper, but not necessarily so. It's just that the supermarkets want to make more money. That's what they're there for, and they want to make more money out of the suppliers. and suppliers are in a difficult situation because they don't want to fall out with the supermarkets. I mean, you can't afford to fall out with people like Tesco and Sainsbury's in the UK, or with Woolworths and Coles in Australia, because that's big business they're going to be losing. But then again, what do? They have to walk on hot coals, really, to try and pacify the supermarkets, but also to make a buck, because they're there to make money. Both sides are there to make money. And so, therefore, both the UK initially and then followed by Australia decided to set up a grocery adjudicator. And the grocery adjudicator works on a grocery code of conduct. And that grocery code of conduct explains exactly the way that the supermarkets and the suppliers will operate business together. Well, things are not going to plan in Australia. They have a grocery code of conduct there, and they have a voluntary agreement of business behaviour between the supermarkets and suppliers. So it's not mandatory now. In the UK it is mandatory, but in Australia it's voluntary. Local media says this follows increased pressure tactics towards suppliers by both Woolworths and Coles. The supermarkets have been said to have been regularly breaching the code's provisions, and one supplier said he'd been threatened with delisting after he asked for modest price increases. Now, delisting means the supermarket says, "Okay, had enough of you, see ya," and that's it. They're off the shelf, and they can't afford to be off the shelf. But they also they face rising costs, rising employee costs, rising ingredients costs, and supermarkets' attitude is, "Oh, we're not going to bear those. That's your problem. You're the supplier. You find a way of still making money." Well, that's hard, because everybody faces rising costs, and ingredients go up around the world, not necessarily because the ingredient suppliers are wanting to make more money. It's just that there are shortages. Climate change and weather conditions do create shortages in ingredients, and that can hurt. I mean, things like cocoa beans, coffee beans, all things like that, they can get more expensive, and the supplier has to wear the increase in cost, which means he's making less money out of his product, and that really is ridiculous. So apparently the Australian Commerce and Competition Committee says it knows what's been happening, but it hasn't yet decided what to do. Now, Woolworths, of course, they are not going to be on the back foot. They're a big company, a lot of power, and so they're saying, no, this is absolutely ridiculous. No, if the suppliers have got a complaint to make, then there are channels that they can go to make the complaint. And if they don't want to reveal who they are, it can be an anonymous complaint, and that's always been the problem. The suppliers don't want to say who they are, because if they reveal who they are, then the supermarkets say, "You're causing trouble. We don't like troublemakers. I think we've had enough of you. We'll find an alternative supplier." And so that's always been the risk. Well, by having an anonymous channel, then yes, it might help, but I don't think anonymous complaints really work as well as standing up to it and saying, "Look, this is who it is. It's me, and I'm complaining about this." So something has got to give, and hopefully they'll be able to sort that out in Australia. I really think the Australian government should really stand up and say, "Look, guys, it's going to be mandatory. It's not going to be voluntary anymore. You have to sign up to it if you want to do business with each other." And I think that's what they should do. So we'll just have to see what happens. Aldi says its way of doing business with suppliers has always been to follow the spirit and clauses of the code. So Aldi feels happy with the way it's working. Unfortunately, New Zealand doesn't have a code for suppliers and supermarkets to follow, and it really does need a code. And it's time the New Zealand government, the Commerce Commission, came to the party and said, "Okay, well, Australia's doing it." And this is a strange situation, because Australia and New Zealand are, I could say, joined at the hip as far as food is concerned, because there is a body called ANZFA, which is the Australian and New Zealand Food Safety Association, and they're the people who rule food safety matters in both countries. So there's already collaboration in certain areas, and I cannot see why New Zealand cannot have a grocery code of conduct that the suppliers have to sign up to, and have an adjudicator who keeps an eye on this area, because this does affect prices and affects consumers. So we'll have to wait and see. Now, Coke comes up quite often. Now, Coke, as we know, has been moving into coffee because it's seen the writing on the wall. Parents are worried about children drinking too much Coke. People are worried about drinking too much Coke. It's full of sugar and caffeine. And so, seeing the writing on the wall, Coke bought the Costa coffee chain in the UK, which is the second largest coffee chain in the world, and like Starbucks, a similar sort of thing. And they've been producing Costa cold coffee products and cold chocolate products. And now they've launched a new fortified milk drinks range in Australia called NutriBoost. But what happens here, there will soon happen in New Zealand and other areas. The drinks are fortified with protein, calcium, fibre and vitamin D. They're starting with 3 variants: banana, chocolate and vanilla. It's the same old 3. They always start with those. And we'll see how it rolls. But certainly you're going to see more of that, and you're going to see less of the Sprites and the Cokes and the Diet Cokes and the other things they've been doing, because people are moving away. A lot of people are just drinking water and not even drinking fizzy drinks. So Coke has to get its revenue from somewhere, so that's the direction it's taking. Now, Danone, the French company which makes a lot of food for supermarkets, they're moving into plants. See, insects, plants. Danone's US plant-based business could become as big as its traditional yogurt business, or yogurt as it's known in New Zealand, there in 10 years, says CEO Emmanuel Faber. The unit, which includes Silk and So Delicious, currently generates less than $1 billion, that's US dollars, in sales, compared with $2 billion in dairy. But the category is growing faster as consumers race to adopt vegan alternatives to everything from yogurt to hamburgers. Danone will start selling plant-based yogurts under Activia, its largest brand, in countries like Spain, France and the UK within the next 12 months. And we move to the discounters. And as I say, we're always going to be talking about discounters because they are the growing part of the grocery business. Now, the UK grocery market grew by only 1.3% during the 12 weeks to the 19th of May, according to Kantar. That's a data company. The Big Four supermarket multiples suffered against tough comparatives with the same period last year. That time, it was boosted by good weather and the royal wedding. Last year's growth was 2.7%. While Tesco's overall sales were flat, its performance was the strongest out of the Big Four, as you'd expect, because they're coming back from all the awful problems they've been having, supported by demand for its own label ranges. Sainsbury's sales continue to fall. Asda fell 0.2% despite online growth of 10.7%. You can see the way people are going. And Morrison's saw sales and market share fall as well. Aldi and Lidl, on the other hand, continued their strong run and are now worth a collective £344 million more than this time last year. That's a big jump. They had a combined record market share of 13.5%. So they are growing, and they will continue to grow. And this is what the Big Four supermarkets are watching, and they have to do something if they're going to survive against that sort of competition. Right, well, that's the end of my podcast for this week. Don't forget you can catch me on Spotify and Instagram, and now, of course, YouTube. And just search Supermarket Sleuth. And also, please like me on Facebook, because you'll find me there too. If you have a question about supermarkets you'd like me to answer, you'll find me supermarketsleuth@gmail.com or Supermarket Sleuth Auckland on Facebook. And don't forget, you can tune in to me live on the local radio, one of the local radio stations in New Zealand. So I'm on a Saturday morning in New Zealand on a radio station called Magic Talk. I'm on at 8:30, I beg your pardon, on a Saturday morning. If you visit magic.co.nz and then go to talk, because we have two stations, we have music and talk. Go to talk, scroll down until you get to the weekend, and you'll find the Home and Garden Show. Click on there and you can listen live at the appropriate time in your country. Now it's 8:30 in the morning on a Saturday, so you'll need, for example, in the UK that's 9:30 p.m. So you'll find me and you'll hear my segment on Magic Talk. So nice to talk to you, and catch you next week. Bye for now.